Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Deconstructors Club podcast. Actually, it's not just another episode. It is our last episode of season 2. So I'm Alex, your co-host, Bob Azarito, your host, Bob Azarito, your co-host. I don't know. But
did I get a promotion?
What's
going on? I hope not.
It doesn't even matter.
I hope not.
We're both co-hosts. We should just say co-host. That's the way it should be. It really has been that way. So, but we are wrapping up this season. We kind of wanted to do it late last year, but holidays, all of that got in the way. And now we're able to just kind of close it up here. So, Bob, really quick, how were your holidays?
Good. Really, really nice. We always spend our holidays with family, and they're all in the area. I have 3 grown daughters here in the Sacramento, Northern California region, one son in Southern California, and he was not able to come up this year, but we had a great time with kids and grandkids. It was fun. Good Christmas. Yeah.
Great.
Lots of fun. How about you?
Well, it was good. We were with family, but we did. We weren't expecting this at all. My brother-in-law, my wife's brother, had a birthday, and his birthday actually has to share it with Jesus. Well, not the 25th, really, the 24th, but Latinos usually celebrate the 24th. So he loses every year because Jesus wins it every year. But anyways, the attention.
Yeah, of course.
But, his wife said, hey, I want to do a party for him. I want to celebrate him. Do you think you guys can come? I don't expect you to. You're way out in California. They're in Dallas, Texas, or in that area. And so we were like, well, I don't think we're going to be able to because, we're with family, Christmas, all that. But lo and behold, the surprise, we were able to fly down and be there. My sister, Liz's sister, my sister-in-law, her husband were amazing and receiving us as hosts, everything. Just, it was a great time for us. It was like one of those surprise vacations for us. We really needed it. We had been through so much this last year. So, so much loss, so many challenges, but we had a really good time and it really helped us out. Got back the first and we're able to just, once again, be with family and enjoy this time, especially going into the new year. But 2024 was a very, very difficult year.
Very challenging in so many ways.
Yes, very challenging, not only for our loved ones that we lost, but so many things that, had happened in our culture, in our nation, in so many ways. And not only that, last year you retired.
I did.
As a pastor.
I did.
So take us through that. I mean,
it's a tough decision. 50 years been in, ministry of some sort, and decided that it was time to sort of pass it on to someone else and time to move on to something else. And we can kind of get into some of the specific reasons if we want to during this final episode, because I think a lot of the topics of our podcast sort of helped sort of motivate some of those changes for me and for what's next for me. Because although retirement is sort of the way I've framed it, I'm not going to my easy chair to sit back and watch TV for the next however long I have on the earth.
Catch up on all your Netflix.
But I'm just like, what's next? How else? How can I be of help? How what's next for me has been sort of the question. And
well, I mean, there's still so much that is in your heart that you want to do, and the podcast. We're working on the podcast, and I know there's plans for other things too, but definitely. To get you to that point, though, to say, I need to transition, what were the things that just kind of began? You talked about the podcast. What were those ideas and thoughts that were starting to percolate?
So, as we've been talking about some of the challenges and difficulties for people who are making big changes in their belief systems, in their life, in their associations with churches or denominations, I realize that when something's happening in our own lives, you can be pretty sure that it's happening in a lot of other people's lives as well.
Definitely.
Because the culture moves because things are happening within people.
Mm-hmm.
And so this idea of deconstruction, although it's not a new term or a new concept or idea, it became clear to me that, and especially because of some of the recent political things that we've discussed, on the podcast, there are a lot of people who are experiencing some level of lostness in terms of where they belong,
right?
And do they belong,
right?
Because as these institutions change, they leave a lot of people scratching their heads and wondering where they fit or why they don't fit in any longer. And so deconstruction is really about recognizing how you no longer fit in a particular community, and then you sort of like head out on a journey to figure out if there is a place where you actually do fit now. And it's a tough, difficult change. And so I began to wonder what's going to be my role in terms of participating in some of those changes. And it just occurred to me that I think probably it's not going to be from within the church where I'm going to have the greatest impact moving forward. I really enjoyed my time as a pastor of a church, but it's really hard for churches to grasp the weight and the expanse of the changes that are going on in the culture, because they're so focused on their own organization and
preservation
and what's needed for their own system. It's really hard for them to step back and see the larger picture going on. In fact, there's even some resistance to it because there are a lot of things happening that sort of threatening some of these very long-standing organizations that have been around for a long, long time.
Right.
And so, so it's been a soul-searching time for me as I've tried to figure out what am I being called to do in my life next. And
many times you would repeat to me, since we've been working together, that you don't want to be caught in this repetitious kind of, I'm just caring for something that's literally dying, like in this hospice mode, because you really felt the frustration of, we need to be doing more.
Right.
We can't just be holding down things that, basically are not, thriving and turning around and, starting to create much more life, what we're looking for, because times have changed.
Right.
The church cannot function the same way and be able to survive. Yeah. And it's happening everywhere.
And what occurred to me was that asking the church to change and meet the culture where the culture is at is really a tall order for established churches.
Right.
They can do it, but it takes a tremendous amount of creativity and bravery on their part. And sometimes it's like asking too much of people who just aren't at that place in their lives. So it was a tough time. It was a really push-pull kind of experience for me because I love the people at the church and I've developed these close relationships with them.
Right.
But I think we're at a place in our society where dramatic change is going to have to be embraced in order for the next thing to show. It's going to show up with or without our participation. It's just coming. And so, but it also needs leadership and it needs someone to speak into those changes. And I felt drawn to try to do my part to
prepare,
to help prepare that for that. Yeah.
And your context isn't, and we're not even talking about you now pastoring a conservative type of evangelical type of church. You're talking about mainline church. You're talking about church that's much more open to progressive ideologies, much more liberal minded, and open minded, but yet it's the institutional aspects
Yeah.
that traditional
Right.
aspects that hold people back from even progressing in methods and ways to become more relevant.
Right. Interpretations were different in the main line than in the conservative evangelical, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Much more openness, much more accepting, but some of the changes to institutional kinds of barriers and boundaries and expectations, they were more difficult to.
Right.
They're more difficult for the church to move beyond, and it's really hard for current churches to figure out who they are outside of those kinds of structures that have always kind of
Right.
defined them.
Right.
And define their purpose and define what their job was.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, the traditional church now, basically views itself as fairly monolithic, that it's a centralized sort of organization that has its own budget, its own members, its own its own checkbook, and its own goals and objectives, and the church views itself as trying to meet those goals and objectives by the some of the old patterns and ways and strategies.
Which worked.
It worked for a long time.
Last century.
With the
I mean,
way
no,
back
I'm being
in
honest.
The,
It's
yeah,
like
back in the 1900s,
Yeah.
it worked. But as we've moved into the 21st century,
and we're already a quarter into the 21st century.
they began to not produce the results that the churches had been hoping for.
Mm-hmm.
And so the thought is that when things aren't working, you would think that churches would really be willing to try new things and embrace new ways.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a tall order.
Right.
It's because the structures, because people can't visualize without those structures, who are we? And
because they identify themselves with those structures.
With the structures, and our church, they speak of my church.
Mm-hmm.
They speak of my pastor, our program. They have the idea that they can still somehow bring people in to the model that they've been used to.
Yeah.
And the problem is, well, there are lots of problems with that, but one of the bigger problems is that our society has changed,
Mm-hmm.
and people aren't looking for that experience.
Right.
At least the majority of people aren't looking for that, especially the young people. But
Right.
the majority of people aren't looking for that kind of structured experience, and so it's hard. When the structure no longer matches the community or the society, you kind of you're at crossways with purposes
Right.
and success.
Well, the
in a lot of ways.
irrelevance creates a disconnect.
Definitely.
And that disconnect is what creates the bubble and the island that this church begins to live within, that they have no awareness of what's actually happening outside of that bubble, what's going on in the community.
And the reason
and
that
beyond.
structures don't typically change or transform into the next thing is because in order to transform into the next thing, you have to be willing to risk your
Right.
current situation
Right.
and your current objectives and even your current assumptions and I don't know how else to say it, structures. You have to be willing to risk those in order to find the next thing. But if you're holding on tightly,
Right.
like it's got to happen this way, with these programs, with these
Right.
structures, with this mentality, then it's really hard to. That's why mostly what happens is present structures have to die in order for new structures to
And
show
Bob,
up.
there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah,
They should.
yeah.
So that way new things could be birthed. It's interesting because I was talking to a friend of mine just a couple of days ago, and over a beer, we were hanging out, and I really love what he was talking about. He said, the problem with the church is that they're afraid to die. He said, yeah, that's what Jesus preached about all the time. If I would die like the seed that's sown, dying brings resurrection. Our own theology teaches us that things need to die to be reborn again. Yeah. That mentality of resurrection is the Christian narrative. Yeah. But what's happening is that it's the opposite, is people are more afraid to die. What if we would let it die?
Yeah.
What could be birthed out of that? And one of the things that Liz and I risked so much when we closed down our church, that compared to many other, contexts, is thriving and successful. But for us, it was like we need to transition into something new. We have to allow something to die. Mm-hmm. We have to take it there so that something new could be birthed. But yet, in these older structures that have been around for so long, there's this major fear of we can't let go of it. We gotta preserve it as much as possible. Why do we have to? Mm-hmm. Why do we have to preserve it if even in your efforts of preserving, it's still dying? Why not just start preparing for something new?
Yeah.
Why not state we need to redefine what we need to look like?
People don't know how to do that and keep the present structures going. It's so
because they identify with those.
Yeah, and they can only think in terms of those parameters, those structures. They can only think in certain ways, like getting people to come, for example, that as a structure, getting them to come to us. That's the way the church always thought of itself. Not always, but for a long time has thought of itself. Yep. And growth or these organizations grew kind of easily at a certain time when what the society was looking for and what the organizations were providing matched up. So people viewed the church as a place they could go to get certain things or to become a part of certain things. But now, because the society has changed, they're not asking those same questions and therefore not looking to the church as an organization. And then the church has changed, parts of the church has changed its sort of focus and self-identity. For example, the Christian nationalism. I almost forgot the name of the thing that we've been talking about. So Christian nationalism has changed the definition of what the church is and what the goal of the church is. And has revived something that the church moved away from for a long period of time, and now it's back to the idea of political control. and power. And so it was always sort of lurking in the background, but the church became much more focused on people and on caring for people. And we had talked about that in one of our podcasts about taking care of the poor and feeding the hungry and, the disenfranchised and building orphanages and hospitals. And, the church became
always caring for the least
of these. And then all of a sudden this shift where all of a sudden now these Christian organizations were going to take over the centers of power and control the world through these centers of power. Well, that's a different definition that has
a crusader definition.
That we did live through that period in the church, but
now it's modern crusades that we're going to start going.
Absolutely. And so this idea
starting with January 6th of 2021.
That the main thing we need to do is take over the centers of power, those mountains,
the 7 mountains.
And so anyway, I just felt that it was time for me to explore other ways to participate in this changing landscape. And I just came to believe that it probably wasn't going to be from within the church or from having a role as a leader or a pastor from within the church. I didn't mind it. It was fine. But I just felt like I was being called to do something else, even though I don't know what that is yet. Because until you're willing to leave something, it's hard to find what's coming.
That happened to us, both Liz and I, when we left the church. There's nothing that we could do to predict and say, not unless there was this handover job that was waiting for you. And it wasn't even like that because we're in the middle of the pandemic. It was happening. And so there was fallbacks that we had, but it wasn't at all, something that we could say, hey, I got this waiting for me, so I don't need to do this. It was more of, we have to trust in this process. We have to trust in this process. There's a chapter closing, a door closing, and then there'll be something open on the other side.
Yeah, and whenever that happens, you think of the early church, whenever that happens, it wasn't, they didn't use the synagogue model or the temple model to start the new Christian movement.
Yeah.
That's not
it's a good perspective. Yeah.
What happened was you had communities of common concern forming, and they were just people that were tired of some of the old ways, tired of being excluded, tired of the power-hungry leadership, for example, that you
saw it in the religious system, the temple system,
absolutely,
the political system. Everybody was being exploited or oppressed. They were not going to follow that.
Right, and I picture Jesus as one who came to speak to that system that was no longer working, challenging that system that was no longer working, trying to bring reform, just like, say, Martin Luther did in the 1500s, trying to bring reform to that system. And of course, what happens over and over again, that system resists change, which that's what systems do typically, and end up eliminating Jesus, tried to eliminate Martin Luther and so many other
and it's interesting
revolutionaries.
Because Paul, his intention was never to create Christianity.
No, absolutely.
It was to reform Judaism. He was a Jew all the way to the end, and he believed that there was a new way.
And Paul ends up leading not Judaism, but a new community. Because the structures of Judaism,
they
that
excluded.
old system just said no to the new.
Completely.
We're afraid of the new. They didn't know it included Gentiles. My goodness, how can that be? How can you have a religious system that included Gentiles? Because we've lived so long excluding Gentiles. Our identity is wrapped around it, just like the church today. It excludes non-Christians.
And if we include them, they gotta follow all the rules that we give them. They gotta be just like us. And here comes Paul and says, nope, they don't have to be at all like that. What?
So here's the thing. So for Paul to say Gentiles are included, it'd be like us saying non-Christians are included in the church. And that is just like, wait. You can't. That is like non-comprehensible.
That's how
to
it was
the
for them.
modern church. How do you include people that don't have your belief system,
that don't have to circumcise? What are you, crazy?
It just was
circumcision was like they don't have to come and say the prayer or the altar or come to all of the ways of conversion. Paul was saying they don't have to do that.
Then what are they? There's like no comprehension for what that is then. That is why people might consider deconstruction dangerous.
Exactly.
The reason they think deconstruction is dangerous is because we don't know what's next. Remember, we talked about that early on. I think in season 1, we talked a lot about when you start deconstructing, you don't know what's coming. You don't know what's next. All you know is I no longer fit in this. And there's a vast desert between deconstruction and the next thing.
So you're saying this because that's one of the main reasons, if not the main reason, why you retired.
Yeah, and I was sort of tired of the job of
I know that. Yeah. Go ahead. Keep on.
Doing the work of the church in order to keep I was hired by the church to do the work of the church, but my heart was going toward trying to help bring change to the help to be a part of the change that was going on. Let me put it that way. I'm not bringing anything.
No, yeah.
There's change happening, and I wanted to be a part of it. And I felt there was a tension between what I needed to do, rightly so, because it was part of my job to be the pastor of the church, and what I felt was needed to help participate in whatever change.
And that was one of the main reasons why both Liz and I also, closed down the church when we did, was because even though it was a larger congregation, we had staff, we had volunteers. The problem is that all we could do, it consumed us. Our time was just focused on maintaining what we had and not really focusing on the vision that we really wanted. Yeah. How do we make a difference in our world? How do we make a difference in our society? How do we make a difference in our community? And the moment we shift that attention, you start losing people.
Yeah.
Because you have to take care of me. This is not about just taking care of you. This is about how do we really make an impact and bring change to the world.
Yeah. So one of the saying, I'm a Presbyterian pastor, right? So part of this might seem a little far afield for a moment, but hopefully I'll get where I'm wanting to go. A big part of Reformed thinking, we call Reformed thinking, is the kind of thinking that came out of the Reformation. Mm-hmm. Martin Luther, Calvin, these thinkers that were bringing dramatic, mind-altering, life-altering changes, radical thoughts from
ideas.
The Catholic Church that they were coming out of. But the saying that we usually have on that is reformed and always reforming. Mm-hmm. That's what came out of the Reformation. The idea that reform started, but reform continues on. And but what's interesting is I think we say that, but we don't do that. Mm-hmm. We say always reforming, but don't touch that. And don't touch that, and don't touch that.
Which is not reforming.
So
progressing.
It's taken a while because we solidified the reforms of the Reformation movement. We turned them into doctrines. We turned them into now that happened in the 300s as well. But you turn them into principles of unquestionable principles of doctrine, and then you form your organizations around them, and you circle the wagons around them. And as soon as you do that, you begin to lose the always reforming part of the saying. And so, but I think what's happening in deconstruction today is it's the reformed part of the Reformation that's being challenged and reformed. In other words, you can reform certain things, but don't touch these. Well, now we need to touch these.
And that's the point, because, coming into mainline denominations, I came in from very fundamentalist conservative. Yeah. And for me, it was like, okay, this is what progressive ideology looks like, or progressive theology looks like. But what I encountered was, the progressive ideology was there. The progressive theology was there. But there was no progressive practice or methodology that was happening. So a lot of it was the preservation of the tradition and the practice that has been done for so long. And so I was at the beginning kind of confused. I was like, wait a minute, you identify as progressive, but yet you're not progressive. You identify as open-minded, yet you're not open-minded all the way. We were just talking about those things. So for me, it was like a mixed signals. It's like, what's happening here? I thought that I could just come in and feel completely safe, that I could come in and open up entirely. I find that that's not the case. And I don't mean that I'm not, as open, or I'm as closed as I was when I was with the conservatives, because that was very much not safe.
Yeah.
But no, I can be definitely much more open, because there are relationships and friendships that I built in mainline denominations, which I treasure, which definitely we've shared the same values, and the same mindset. But it's not always that way. I have to feel the spaces that I'm in to see if actually it's safe or not.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is what you're talking about. Yet you encounter, there's the ideology, but yet you encounter the practice. It's not there. The practice is not a progressive practice. It's not a progressive methodology. They're not completely open the way I thought it was going to be. Mm-hmm. So, and it's interesting because a few weeks ago, I was invited to talk about Christian nationalism, actually last month. And at one of our churches, our Presbyterian churches, which I thought was one of the most amazing experiences. I hadn't had an experience like that in mainline, churches before. And first I sat there, they interviewed me. We talked a lot about Christian nationalism and how I came out of all of that, right? And especially the NAR and so forth. Then we went through Q&A, and what was supposed to be an hour long ended up almost becoming 2 hours, about an hour and a half. And at the very end, I thought was really important, because I asked, is there any final questions? And one of the people present asked the question of, if there's people like you that are coming out of this, which most definitely there are, that have been disappointed and hurt by what has been happening, how can we get prepared for that? I almost started crying when I heard that question. I said, I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe in that question that you're talking about. I really feel that mainline denominations have an opportunity to be able to create larger spaces for people that are deconstructing and exiting out of fundamentalism and so forth. I said, and I think that is a question that churches, mainline churches especially and specifically, have to be asking themselves. And you know what I find is that I come into mainline churches, they're not asking that question. And I'm like, how could you? I'm here and I can bring more people here. But yet, if you're not asking that question, that's not safe for me, neither is it safe for them. We need to ask that question. And one of the things that I told them too, that I thought was very important, I said, and because they asked me, well, what do you think are the hindrances? I was like, beyond all the other stuff that we've been talking about, right? But what are the hindrances? I said, look, I'm just going to make it basic, because we're already at the end of, that time. I didn't want to open up another can of worms. I said, I think that what I find within this denomination is that you all choose polity over people. I said, you say you choose people, but you choose polity over people. You would choose your system over people, even though you say you don't. Everybody always says, all are welcome here. We welcome people. We want to make them feel comfortable when they come to church. But the moment they engage the community is so dedicated to its polity that it doesn't create much room for people to come in that are different, that are new, that think differently, that come from different backgrounds, different cultures, and so forth. How can we prioritize people over polity? I'm not against polity. I said, but if polity is over people, I'm against it. We have to shift the mentality of how can we put people as a priority over polity. If we would just do that with all the progressive ideology that it's already there, could you imagine what could happen? And there have been churches that have done that, and they've seen the differences. They've seen the results, because there are many people that have deconstructed, that have left, that are looking, like you're saying, looking for a community. Yeah. Just to be a part of something.
The problem when letting go of polity is that for the people who feel secure within their polity, because they know where all the walls are and the posts and they get their heads wrapped around it. It's safe. We know how we do business. Mm-hmm. It's the processes that have been in place for a long time. And so in order to avoid misunderstandings. We put polity in. So, well, that's not how we do it. We do it this way.
And I get the organizational aspects of it.
Right.
I'm not against that at all. That's what I said. I'm not against polity in and of itself. The problem is when you begin to prioritize it over people.
Right. So you have to be, so it feels really risky to let go of your polity. It feels like, oh, we're just inviting chaos here if we let go of polity. And again, back to that same issue where we're afraid that.
And you look at 1001 New Worshiping Communities, for the most part, I don't want to get in trouble here, but they don't really follow the polity.
Right.
They take more risks at doing unorthodox, non-traditional type of gatherings and communities.
Or even how decisions are made.
Right. I mean, it doesn't mean that they're in leadership and there's, there definitely is, but it's not sticking to the traditional polity like you were saying.
So if you do something in the church that is good and that people like, but you don't follow the polity, it really can, the polity can really get in the way of what you're really trying to accomplish.
That is what you're saying right there is the problem.
Right. And so what we do is we prioritize exactly what you said, the polity, and just make decisions based upon whether you follow the polity rather than on what is really going on.
Right.
What you're really, what is really happening.
Yeah.
And
what are the needs? Are we listening to people? What are they thinking?
And when people come to a new church, that's what will turn them off.
Exactly.
If all of a sudden, they feel as though they are, being pulled into a system that isn't paying attention to them as individuals or as people or their needs.
Or they feel that you just want me here because you want another volunteer. You want another body, another person
very difficult.
that are contributing to your system.
Right.
I don't want to be exploited like that. I'm out.
Yeah, it makes it really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So for a long time, I wondered, why do we do membership in a church? Did you have members in your church when you were?
Yeah, we changed the terms because we didn't want people to feel like they were a part of a club, a closed committee or a closed club, a closed community. So we didn't like the word members as much. I mean, when we grew up with those, because the word member would also give a sense of greater privilege, greater access than somebody that's not, instead of feeling greater responsibility, greater sense of belonging. Right. See, there's a difference. People that are given that membership, that are paying the quota, whatever it is, they get their, let's say if it's a golf club, you become a member, you get all the privileges, because Bob loves golf.
You get to golf, you get to go to their dinners, you get to
there it is.
Buy food in the shop.
And if I come and I'm not a member, do you think they'd allow me in to do it? Of course not. No. That's how churches have functioned.
You have to join.
Yep, you got to be that member.
Yeah.
And the difference is, how do we help people understand a true member of a community is somebody that feels and senses that they belong, that this is my family. Instead of saying I'm a member of this club or I'm a member of this, am I a member of this family? How do I identify as a member of this family? For instance, in my home, how do I identify my children being a part of our family? It's not because, hey, we're giving them a card and they got their privileges and even though they do in a sense because they're kids, from our family. But you could adopt more children. You could bring in more people. They could feel that way. How can we help people feel that way? And that's one of the things that we kind of shifted the word member just so that we can take that out of the minds of people. We put more partner. How do you partner with us? Would you like to become a partner in our congregation? And we're not forcing anybody. The partnership is basically you partner with us to do the mission that we want to accomplish.
So many of those terms,
and even
they need to be refined.
Even that term, I believe, needs to be refined too.
Changed because it gives the wrong impression.
Right.
And the wrong impression is you have to meet certain standards of acceptance,
right,
before you can view yourself as a part of the community.
See, and that partner you're a part of.
Yeah.
That was always the key for us. How do we help you feel a part of?
So we want to say everyone belongs, but we don't really believe that.
Nope.
Because if you don't ascribe to all of the viewpoints that we ascribe to, then and are willing to make application and go and to be examined, and to be found acceptable.
Right.
All of those images communicate things that we're saying we no longer think. And so those are the things that I think it's hard for churches to grasp, because it's so different from what they are used to.
Right.
They're used to examining people who want to become a part of the church, like you want to become a part of the golf community. Yeah. Do you have enough money? Do you, are you willing to, are you of the right race? Do you speak the right language? Do you believe the right things? Right. Then once you do, then you can become a part. And this concept is contrary to Jesus.
Right.
So how do we change to reflect something different? And those are hard questions.
And those are questions that need to be asked, and not just asked within the church community, but why can't you just ask people that are not a part? If you would want to be a part of this, what are ways that you would be able to feel like you want to be a part of this?
Yeah.
Are we asking the right people? Are we listening? Are we asking the right questions? Are we asking the right people? Are we listening? We're always just throwing ideas within the bubble of our, same old context. We need to challenge ourselves to, like you were saying earlier, how do we get prepared for someone else instead of thinking, how do we just care for what we have?
Right. So one of the things I was hoping we could do in the seasons to come, or at least one of the seasons to come, is to begin to examine some of this belief system, some of the aspects of the belief system that we received from the Reformation period. And
like original sin that went
beyond. What needs to change within that belief system? I know there's a lot of people doing their darndest to hold on to that belief system, because they think if you let go of it, then all hell will break loose, literally. Right. But also that some of those beliefs are really in the way of the future, and so. Maybe we could actually begin to examine some of those beliefs, such as original sin,
right,
or salvation by faith alone. What does that mean?
Right.
What does inerrancy of Scripture mean?
Right.
What do some of these doctrines?
I love that you're saying that, because this is a big part of deconstructing. How do we challenge our belief systems that have held us captive? This past Sunday, our friend Bonnie preached about, and she talked about original sin, which I thought was wonderful. Yeah. I went up and I just kind of summed up a little bit about how original sin for me kept me captive in guilt and shame all the time. And because of that, it keeps you captive also under the powers of leadership. Yeah. Because you're always at their mercy of them guiding you out of your guilty conscience, your guilt, your shame, and I told the congregation, I said, the moment I deconstructed that belief system, I never knew what it was to live without guilt and shame, just to live in the light of unconditional love of God. Because I never felt that way. I heard about it, I thought about it, but I didn't experience love unconditional, because I always felt that guilt held me back from truly being 100% accepted and loved. Once that was deconstructed, it's like I feel freedom. I feel liberated. Yeah. I make mistakes, but I'm not living. And that's the problem with people that think in extremes. Oh, if you do that, then now you're going to live in, without restraint. And no, on the contrary, you begin to understand love and what it is to be guided by unconditional love, not only from God, but you loving others unconditionally, loving yourself unconditionally. All of these things are a process that you can't learn under a system that keeps you in bondage, in guilt and shame.
Yeah.
And there's something real quick that a friend of mine, we're about almost done here, but posted and said, imagine how different things would be if we saw theology not as a construction site, but as a laboratory. Instead of setting doctrines in concrete, we'd test theories. We wouldn't hold to the past in fear. We'd lean into the future with curiosity, wonder, and possibility. All the things that we talked about right now.
So good. And that's the call of deconstruction. The call is to not be afraid,
right?
To ask. This is going back to almost the beginning of our podcast.
Right.
Not being afraid to ask questions, not being afraid to say what you really think, not being afraid to test out certain ways of thinking among people,
right?
And to refine and explore and discover these things. But when you're trying to dance around these concrete pillars, it's so encumbering. You can hardly move in terms of real growth and discovery. And that's what excites me, to be able to and it's happening everywhere, and we just wanted to be a part of that conversation, because there's a new way to think about Christianity that is not really it's being discussed a lot in various places, but you have to know where to look,
right?
Because the predominant voices, it's not being discussed. It's still that sort of arrogant, we know what's best, we'll tell you who's in, who's out, who's right, who's wrong. We'll be in control, we'll be in charge. But there is an undercurrent of innocence and discovery going on at other levels that is growing. It's powerful.
Well, I think that now that we're concluding this season, it's almost like we're also giving an introduction for the next season, that we want to address these issues. We want to address these certain teachings and doctrines, and how we believe the church, is beginning to be redefined. How we believe, what about sin? What does that really look like? And beyond, what do the end times look like? What are these things? How can we begin to, and it's in a process of deconstructing. We're not going to say we're reconstructing. We're still in deconstruction, but in that process, we begin to find the reconstruction part. In that process, we begin to have that curiosity.
Yeah, at the beginning, you don't even realize there are other ways to think about it. There are other ways that these things can be put together. And you don't know that at the beginning. Right. All you know is what's not working any longer. And it takes some courage to be able to move forward to discover some new ways of thinking.
I want to encourage our listeners to, continue to be with us through this journey. Now, we are going to take, a few weeks. We're going to come back strong in our third season. We want to take some time to really just get back to the drawing board, talk about, get ready with these subjects, and really introduce this next season and focus more on those aspects like we were talking about.
And we are only weeks away from Trump's presidency. And also,
who knows? We might throw one in there. I don't know. We might throw a middle of the season.
Well, because the NAR has won for the short time.
For now.
Yeah. And we have no idea what's coming.
Right.
What kind of challenges society is going to be faced with as a result of some promised programs that are going to be facing us. And we haven't even, mentioned the new administration on this podcast for a while, but we may be facing some new things, and the church may be facing some new things in the future.
And I also wanted, now that you're talking about new things that are coming up, when we start our next season, I want us to be able to, from the very first episode, I hope we can do that, to start promoting a get together for those that are listening that are nearby, Northern California area. We'd love to see you. We're starting something new called Common Table Gathering, that we want them to be there, and invite all the other folks that are listening to us, viewing us, that are in the Northern California area, or maybe you're just passing by during the time that we, that we're going to announce. We'd love to have you with us. We were thinking of maybe doing it at a brewery, hanging out.
Sure.
Doing something like that. We would love to have you. So
stay tuned.
Stay tuned. And, let us know how this season also has helped you, how this season has impacted you and has changed you. I've heard stories already from some people, came back, even a family member said, hey, this podcast has been significant in bringing change to my life. And so I'm really pleased and happy about those things, because sometimes these subjects are difficult to talk about. But we need to, so that we know that people out there understand what we're going through, and we're in it together. Absolutely. And we're in this process together. So send us a message, send us, either it be on our YouTube channel, either it be on our socials, Deconstructors Club podcast. We'd love to hear from you. And stay tuned, because season 3 is coming. We might throw out some promos before season 3 starts, so that way we're still alive, we're kicking, we're well, we're getting ready for it.
It won't be long.
Yeah, it won't be long. We'll take a few weeks and get prepared and ready. And at the same time, how I said, that first get together, I think, is going to be really cool. So and we're all a part of this club, Deconstructors Club. So you're invited. If you are in this journey with us, you are totally invited. All right. Well, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being with us. I know we kind of went a little longer this time, but it's okay.
Yep.
It's our final one. We wanted to
podcast.
Yeah, we wanted to do our final episode. And Bob, we're looking forward to this next season.
We are.
And I think it's going to be good. Who knows? We're still trying to decide if we want to be in this context or not, or in this, studio, made up studio here, which we love.
Maybe
the
background,
else. Maybe somewhere else. We'll see. But for now, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for just being on this journey with us. So we're signing off for season 2, and we'll see you all very soon in season 3. Take care.
Take care.